Welcome to the deep dive. You're likely here because, well, you want to get a grip on what's happening in the world, right?
hmm
But you don't have endless hours to sift through all the news and reports. We totally get it. That's what we're here for.
Right. Think of this as your curated briefing. We've done the digging into a recent issue of The Economist. This one's dated April 19th, 2025.
Yeah.
And it's packed. Articles, data,
Mm.
analysis. It covers, the global economy, tech, social shifts, the works.
Our mission really is simple. We want to pull out the crucial bits, the insights, maybe those head-scratching facts, the stuff you'll actually find useful, maybe even a little surprising.
Exactly.
We want you to walk away feeling properly informed, like you've got the essentials, but without that feeling of being totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, cut it through the noise.
So where do we kick off? The global economy always feels like the right place to start, doesn't it? It sort of touches everything else.
Absolutely. And you can't miss The Economist's cover story this time.
Yeah.
How a dollar crisis will unfold.
Yeah.
That definitely grabs your attention. Ooh, yeah. It lays out a scenario, a potentially grim one, for American savers if global investors suddenly lose faith in U.S. assets.
Okay, dollar crisis. Sounds pretty serious, but hang on, isn't the dollar actually quite strong right now? That feels like a bit of a puzzle.
It is, and that's what's fascinating here, that apparent contradiction.
Right.
The dollar's strength now is partly its old role, the safe haven thing. Plus, U.S. interest rates have been higher than some other big economies.
Okay.
But the analysis suggests this could flip. If investors get worried about, say, the sustainability of U.S. debt long-term, or if they see better returns elsewhere, that shift could really send ripples, maybe even waves, through global finance.
So the very things helping the dollar now could, I guess, become its weakness later on.
Potentially, yeah.
And stuck right in the middle is the Federal Reserve, trying to manage inflation without, slamming the brakes too hard on the economy. Sounds like an impossible tightrope walk.
It is a really delicate balancing act. The Fed's main tools, adjusting interest rates, managing money supply, they're trying to thread that needle.
Yeah.
And the article hints that it gets even trickier if that perception of the dollar's stability starts to, wobble.
In times like these, when things feel uncertain, people always talk about safe havens. Gold comes up constantly. Is gold looking like that kind of refuge right now?
Gold definitely gets mentioned. It's traditionally seen as that hedge against inflation, economic turmoil. And the articles do note its resilience.
But I feel a but coming.
Well, yeah.
Well,
Even gold isn't like a magic bullet. Its price can swing quite a bit, and it doesn't pay you interest or dividends like some other investments. So finding those truly safe havens, still a big challenge for investors.
it's not just the massive financial picture, though, is it? It's also about how people are actually feeling on the ground. I saw a note, I think, from the World This Week section about a U.S. consumer sentiment survey.
The University of Michigan one.
That's the one. Showed a really sharp fall in April. Levels not seen since, 1952. That's a long time ago.
It really is. And that sharp drop, it just underscores the anxiety bubbling under the surface in the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
It suggests people are feeling pretty uneasy about things right now and about what's coming down the pike for their own finances.
Now, shifting gears slightly, but still in economics, the Buttonwood column mentioned vaccine nationalism potentially
Yeah.
morphing. What's that about in an economic sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. The thinking is that the way countries prioritized getting vaccines for their own populations first during the pandemic, that mindset might now be spreading to broader economic policy. We could see more economic nationalism, meaning countries focusing more on their own industries, their own supply chains, their own economic security.
Right.
It might lead to more protectionist policies, things that favor local production or, restrict foreign investment in certain areas.
Kind of a my country first economic strategy.
Okay.
That could certainly shake up global trade. And speaking of global worries, the amount of debt worldwide is also flagged as a concern, right? In the finance and economics section.
Yes, absolutely. Rising global debt levels are emphasized. And if you connect that to the possibility of an economic slowdown,
Right.
that debt suddenly looks like a much bigger vulnerability. High debt makes it harder for countries, for businesses, to cope with economic shocks when they happen.
Okay, so lots of potential economic clouds gathering, but there is one surprising bit about the euro. It's showing some strength, even with challenges in Europe. Why would that be?
That is an interesting counterpoint, isn't it?
Yeah.
Despite some definite headwinds in the Eurozone, the euro's been surprisingly resilient.
Yeah.
It could be a few things. Maybe relative interest rate differences are playing a part. what rates are offered there versus elsewhere, attracting investors.
Yeah.
It might also just be market perceptions about the Eurozone's underlying stability, perhaps, or maybe something the European Central Bank is doing with its own policies. It's complex.
So while there are definitely global economic worries, it's not like doom and gloom everywhere. Pockets of resilience.
Exactly. It's a mixed picture.
Okay, let's pivot then. Geopolitics. What are the key hotspots and tensions being highlighted in these articles?
Well, unsurprisingly, the war in Ukraine is still a major focus. The Europe section talks about the significant economic strain Russia is under,
Right.
and the growing sense that this could be a really protracted conflict. It also mentions the ongoing debates inside NATO about the best long-term strategy for supporting Ukraine.
A protracted conflict.
Gotcha.
The impact of that goes way beyond the tragic human costs, doesn't it? Reshaping alliances, global stability.
Absolutely. The war hits everything: energy, food supplies, international relations.
Yeah.
And the fact that even within NATO, there are different views on the path forward, it just shows how complex it all is.
Turning back to the U.S. political scene for a moment, it looks like Donald Trump remains a really big force in the Republican Party, and President Biden's facing his own list of challenges.
Yeah, the Americas section notes Trump's enduring influence, both within the Republican base and just the wider political landscape.
Okay.
And it also points to various challenges for President Biden. Could be policy fights, approval ratings, the run-up to future elections, the usual pressures.
Plenty of domestic political currents to watch then. Now, what about China? And this whole ongoing discussion about global power shifts, what's the take in these articles?
Well, there are these continued concerns being raised about how reliant American companies are on the Chinese market.
Right, that comes up a lot.
And the idea of decoupling, basically trying to reduce that economic interdependence, gets discussed in the business in China piece.
Mm-hmm.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it, between the economic advantages of being involved with China and the rising worries about national security and strategic rivalry.
Decoupling, it sounds so neat, but it must be incredibly messy and disruptive in reality. Not like flipping a switch.
Oh, exactly. The global economy is so deeply intertwined, especially with China. Any major attempt to pull back would have really complicated, far-reaching effects for businesses, for consumers, pretty much everywhere.
Shifting focus geographically again, Senegal and Sudan were mentioned. What's the situation in those regions, according to the reports?
The Middle East and Africa section touches briefly on political instability in Senegal. There seem to be some worries about its democratic institutions.
Okay.
And in Sudan, well, the situation is still described as volatile. That's despite ongoing international efforts to mediate the conflict there.
Right.
So yeah, it paints the picture of persistent challenges to peace and stability in those areas.
So from these huge power dynamics down to specific regional conflicts, the global geopolitical scene is definitely complex. Okay, let's move into technology and how it's shaping things. What trends stand out?
One interesting area is the social media battleground. It's really heating up.
Seems like it never stops changing.
Right. The World This Week section highlights TikTok's big rise and the pressure that's putting on the established players, Facebook, Twitter.
And regulators are watching all this closely, too.
Oh, absolutely. All these platforms are facing much more scrutiny about their influence, how they operate, content moderation. The list goes on.
And then there's the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence, AI. Feels like we hear about breakthroughs almost daily.
It really does feel that way. The Science and Technology section dives into AI's growing capabilities, particularly in areas you might not immediately think of, like negotiation or even strategic analysis.
Wow.
They talk about the emergence of AI advisors, which frankly raises some pretty profound questions about how we'll make decisions in the future, maybe the future of certain jobs too.
AI advisors.
Yeah, imagine an AI helping broker a major business deal or advising on a political strategy. It's fascinating and maybe a little unsettling.
Yeah, mind-bending was the word you used earlier. Are we really heading toward algorithms helping with these huge high-stakes choices?
It certainly seems to be a direction of travel. The article probably explores the potential upsides, faster analysis, maybe more objective viewpoints, but also the inherent risks, the ethical questions. What happens if we rely too much on AI for critical decisions? Lots to unpack there.
Okay, switching gears to something, well, more tangible, perhaps. Plastic pollution. We hear a lot about it. Recycling efforts are up. But are we actually winning that battle?
It seems not really winning, no. The Science and Technology section tackles this. Despite all the awareness and initiatives, It points out the persistent challenges.
So recycling isn't the whole answer.
Apparently not. It highlights the complexities, the limitations of current solutions. It suggests we're still searching for truly effective ways to deal with it. It's a reminder that this is just a huge systemic issue.
It really is. You try to do your part, recycle your bits, but then you see the scale of it. Feels overwhelming sometimes.
Hmm.
Now let's touch on the world of work, the labor market, always changing. What's the snapshot from these articles?
They hit on a couple of key things. The Britain section mentions ongoing debates about equal pay, plus the challenges workers are still facing in different sectors.
Still fighting those battles.
Seems so. And separately, the briefing section talks about hybrid work. That trend seems to be continuing, becoming more normalized.
Right.
But employers and employees are still kind of figuring out the kinks, making adjustments. It's an ongoing process.
Equal pay, hybrid work. Definitely two huge themes in how people experience work today. It feels like the whole nature of work got shaken up and is still settling.
That's a great way to put it. The labor market is definitely in a period of, significant change. Lots of discussion about fairness, flexibility, how work fits into life now.
All right, let's move into our final area, culture and social trends. What stood out for you there?
Well, one interesting debate covered in the United States section is about standardized testing, SATs, ACTs, that kind of thing, for college admissions.
Ah, yes. Always controversial.
Very. The article explores the arguments both for and against keeping them, especially looking at it through the lens of diversity and whether these tests are really a fair measure of merit.
It's such a complex issue, isn't it? You have arguments about predicting college success versus worries about bias and who gets access to test prep.
Exactly. Deeply held beliefs on both sides.
What else caught your eye in the culture or society sections?
Also in the U.S. context, and this is obviously very sensitive, the articles touch on abortion access after Roe v. Wade was overturned. The United States section highlights just how much the laws now vary from state to state. It's created this real patchwork, and there are ongoing legal fights constantly reshaping the landscape.
Yeah, a truly fragmented situation, and the impact on individuals depending on where they live must be huge.
Absolutely profound differences.
Okay, shifting to maybe a different life stage.
Mhm.
The culture section mentioned something called adultolescence. What exactly is that?
Yeah, adultolescence. It's basically describing this extended transition period between being a teenager and reaching what we traditionally think of as full adulthood.
So taking longer to hit those milestones.
Right. It acknowledges that for many young adults, things like financial independence, maybe marriage, buying a home, they're happening later than they used to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's becoming more recognized, more normalized as a life stage.
Adultolescence.
Yeah.
Interesting term. It definitely reflects a societal shift we see around us. Okay, finally, just a brief mention of religion in South Korea. What was the point there?
The Asia section just touches on the changing role of religion in South Korean society, probably discussing shifts in who identifies with which religion, the influence of different faiths, how religion intersects with, social and political life there.
So a dynamic religious landscape, too.
Seems that way, yes.
Wow. So across everything, economy, politics, tech, society, it's just
Yeah.
clear we're in a time of really significant flux, lots of reevaluation happening. This has been a really great tour through a diverse set of topics.
It has. And the aim of this deep dive really was to give you that condensed but hopefully insightful overview, a snapshot of key global trends from these recent articles.
And it really hammers home how interconnected it all is, doesn't it? You see how an economic shift can impact political stability, how tech advancements change society and culture.
Yeah.
It's all woven together.
Precisely. It's one big, intricate system. And these articles, taken together, they paint that picture of a world constantly changing, bringing both, opportunities and some pretty big challenges.
So as you, our listener, process all this information, maybe here's something to chew on. Looking at all these different threads, the economic jitters, the geopolitical tensions, the leaps in AI, the shifting social norms, which of these trends do you think will ultimately have the biggest impact, not just globally, but maybe on your own life in the next few years?
Yeah, that's a good question to ponder.
Think about those underlying forces we talked about, the potential ripple effects down the road. There's always more to explore, of course, but we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable perspective and sparked some deeper thinking.